In a quiet little town surrounded by thick forests and winding roads, Lieutenant Sarah Callahan stepped out of her truck for the first time. She had just arrived as the newest member of an elite military K-9 unit stationed nearby. For years, Sarah had worked with some of the best-trained dogs in the world, serving on dangerous missions overseas. But this was different. This wasn't combat. It was civilian life, and she knew earning respect here might be harder than anything she'd faced before. The locals were curious about her from the start. A female K-9 handler. That wasn't something they saw every day. Some people smiled politely when they passed her on the street, but others weren't so welcoming. Among them were the Iron Vipers, a rough biker gang known for their loud motorcycles, leather jackets, and troublemaking ways. They didn't like outsiders, especially ones wearing uniforms or carrying authority. Sarah decided to ignore the whispers at first. She needed groceries, so she stopped at a small diner near the edge of town. The place smelled like coffee and fried food, and the chatter of patrons filled the air. As she sat down at the counter, ordering a simple burger and fries, she felt eyes on her. It didn't take long for the bikers to notice her too. Well, one of them said loudly, leaning back in his chair. His voice carried across the room. "Look what we've got here, a lady soldier." He smirked, glancing around at his friends for approval. They laughed, nudging each other and staring at Sarah's uniform. "What's a girl like you doing with those big, scary dogs?" Another chimed in, mocking her. Sarah kept her cool. She took a slow sip of water, pretending not to hear them. But inside, her heart raced. She wasn't used to being treated this way. Back at the base, no one questioned her abilities. Here, though, things were different. People judged her based on how she looked instead of what she could do. One of the bikers stood up, walking closer to where she sat. He wore a patch on his jacket that read Razor, and his boots clunked heavily against the floor. "You think those dogs can handle real men?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or are they just lapdogs?" Sarah finally turned to look at him. Her expression remained calm, even friendly. "My dogs aren't here to impress anyone," she replied evenly. "But if you're curious, maybe someday you'll find out." Razor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her response. Then he laughed, shaking his head as if amused by her audacity. After finishing her meal, Sarah paid her bill and left without another word. Outside, the crisp autumn air hit her face, and she took a deep breath. She reminded herself why she was here: to serve, to protect, and to make a difference. What the bikers thought of her didn't matter, or so she told herself. As she drove back toward the base, Sarah couldn't shake off the encounter. She knew the Iron Vipers weren't going to let her slide easily into town life. There would be more challenges ahead, and she had to be ready for them. Little did she know, her dogs, Max and Luna, would play a much bigger role in this story than anyone expected. The Iron Vipers didn't back down after their encounter with Sarah. If anything, they grew bolder, treating the surrounding woods like their personal playground. The rules meant nothing to them. No signs, no warnings, and certainly no respect for authority. They came and went as they pleased, leaving behind a trail of destruction wherever they went. Broken branches littered the forest floor. Trash was scattered near the perimeter fence, and there were even reports of vandalism on military equipment left outside for maintenance. Sarah tried to report these incidents to local law enforcement, hoping someone would step in. But each time she called, she was met with indifference. "There's not much we can do," one officer told her over the phone, his tone apologetic yet dismissive. "These guys have been around for years. They don't listen to anyone." It was clear that the town had given up on standing against the bikers, leaving Sarah feeling isolated and frustrated. She knew she couldn't rely on others to solve this problem. It was up to her. Determined to take matters into her own hands, Sarah began organizing stealth patrols with Max and Luna. Under the cover of darkness, the trio ventured deep into the woods, staying hidden while gathering evidence of the Iron Vipers' illegal activities. Armed with a flashlight and her phone camera, Sarah documented everything. tire tracks cutting through protected areas, empty beer cans tossed carelessly onto the ground, and even graffiti sprayed across warning signs. Each piece of evidence brought her closer to proving the gang's wrongdoing. One night, during one of these patrols, Sarah spotted something unusual. Faint lights flickered in the distance, accompanied by the low rumble of engines. Motioning for Max and Luna to stay close, she crept forward, careful not to make any noise. As she approached, she realized what was happening. The bikers weren't just trespassing this time. They were actively damaging property. Several men were using crowbars to pry open a locked gate leading to a restricted zone, laughing and shouting as if they owned the place. Sarah crouched behind a tree, snapping photos and recording videos on her phone. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the proof she needed. Just as she finished capturing the scene, one of the bikers turned his head, spotting her silhouette in the dim moonlight. "Hey," he yelled, pointing in her direction. "That's the dog lady." Panic surged through Sarah, but she didn't freeze. Years of training kicked in, and she quickly signaled for Max and Luna to follow her as she darted into the dense forest. Behind her, the sound of boots crunching leaves and angry voices grew louder. The bikers were chasing her now, shouting insults and threats as they crashed through the underbrush. "You think you're so tough, huh?" one of them hollered. "Let's see how fast you can run without your mutts protecting you." But Sarah wasn't running blindly. She knew the terrain better than they did, having explored every inch of it during her patrols. With Max and Luna keeping pace beside her, she zigzagged through narrow paths and ducked under low-hanging branches, putting distance between herself and her pursuers. After several minutes of weaving through the trees, she finally reached a clearing where her truck was parked. Jumping inside, she started the engine and sped off, her dogs panting heavily in the passenger seat. Though shaken, Sarah felt a flicker of satisfaction. She had managed to gather enough evidence to expose the Iron Viper's actions, and she wasn't about to let them get away with it. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The bikers were angry now, and their pride wouldn't allow them to ignore what had happened. Deep down, Sarah knew they'd come after her again. And next time, they might not be so easy to evade. As she drove back to the base, Sarah glanced at Max and Luna in the rearview mirror. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, full of trust and readiness. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Word of Sarah's nighttime patrols and her efforts to document the Iron Viper's misdeeds spread quickly through the biker gang. Razor, their leader, was furious. He hadn't expected some dog handler to stand up to them or try to expose their activities. To him, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a challenge to his authority. Razor prided himself on being untouchable, someone no one dared cross. But Sarah's persistence was starting to make him look weak in front of his own crew. Determined to put an end to her interference, Razor decided it was time to confront her directly. The next afternoon, he rode his motorcycle to the military base's main gate, flanked by several of his toughest men. Their engines roared as they skidded to a stop, drawing attention from nearby soldiers and staff. Razor dismounted, his leather jacket creaking as he walked toward the guard booth. "I need to talk to that handler," he demanded, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "The one with the dogs." The guards hesitated, unsure how to handle the situation. Before they could respond, Sarah appeared, stepping out of a nearby building. She had been alerted to the commotion and came prepared, with Max and Luna by her side. The two dogs stood tall, their muscles tense and alert, their eyes fixed firmly on the bikers. Even from a distance, the animals exuded power, and the gang members instinctively took a step back, though they tried to hide their unease. Razor smirked when he saw her approach, clearly trying to regain control of the moment. "So, you're the troublemaker," he said, folding his arms across his chest. His tone dripped with mockery. "You've got some nerve sneaking around our territory and taking pictures like you own the place." Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, She met his gaze steadily, speaking in a calm but firm voice. "Your territory is restricted military land," she replied. "And I'm not sneaking. I'm doing my job. If you have a problem with that, take it up with your conscience or the law." Her response only fueled Razor's anger. He stepped closer, glaring down at her. "You think your little pets scare us?" He spat, gesturing toward Max and Luna. "They're nothing but overgrown mutts. What are they gonna do? Bark at us?" Sarah didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she gave Razor a small, confident smile. "If you're so sure they're harmless, why don't we find out?" she suggested. "Let me show you exactly what they can do." For a moment, Razor looked surprised. He hadn't expected her to call his bluff. But he quickly recovered, masking his uncertainty with bravado. "Fine," he said, narrowing his eyes. "But if your dogs are as tough as you claim, let's see them prove it. Tomorrow morning, we'll set up a challenge in the woods, you and your mutts against us. And if they fail..." He trailed off, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Sarah nodded, unfazed. "Agreed," she said simply. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, Max and Luna following obediently at her heels. As she disappeared into the base, Razor watched her go, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. For all his bluster, he couldn't shake the feeling that he might have underestimated her and her dogs. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her quarters, reviewing the plan in her mind. She knew Razor's challenge wasn't just about testing her dogs. It was a power play, an attempt to humiliate her in front of his gang. But Sarah also knew something Razor didn't. Max and Luna weren't ordinary dogs. They were trained professionals, capable of feats most people couldn't even imagine. This wasn't just a demonstration. It was an opportunity to teach the Iron Vipers a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As she looked at her loyal companions resting quietly by her side, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. Whatever happened tomorrow, she was ready. And if Razor thought he could intimidate her, he was about to discover just how wrong he was. The next morning, the forest clearing buzzed with tension. Sarah arrived early, her truck kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop. Max and Luna jumped out eagerly, their tails wagging but their bodies poised for action. Razor and his gang were already there, lounging on their motorcycles or standing in loose clusters, their leather jackets gleaming under the pale sunlight. The air was thick with arrogance and anticipation. Razor stepped forward when he saw Sarah approach, his arms crossed and a smirk plastered across his face. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, his voice carrying just enough mockery to make his point. "But here we are. Let's see if your dogs can actually do anything besides sit pretty." Sarah ignored the jab and focused on setting up the demonstration area. She had brought along basic obstacles, a series of jumps, tunnels, and balance beams, to showcase Max and Luna's agility and discipline. Nearby, she also placed several hidden scents for Luna to track and dummy targets for Max to apprehend during a mock attack scenario. Everything was designed to highlight the dog's training without resorting to unnecessary aggression. As Sarah worked, the bikers laughed and joked among themselves, clearly doubting that the dogs could impress them. One biker leaned over to another, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "What is this? Some kind of dog circus?" His words earned chuckles from the group, but Sarah didn't react. Instead, she gave Max and Luna a quick once-over, ensuring they were ready before turning back to the bikers. "All right," she said, raising her voice slightly so everyone could hear. "Here's how this will work. First, my dogs will complete an obstacle course to demonstrate their speed, focus, and teamwork. Then we'll move on to tracking exercises, followed by a controlled apprehension drill. If you're still not convinced after that," she added with a calm smile, "we can call it quits." Razor shrugged, pretending to be unimpressed. "Fine by me, but don't expect us to be blown away." With a sharp whistle, Sarah signaled for Max and Luna to begin. At first, the bikers watched lazily, leaning against trees or sitting cross-legged on the ground. But within moments, their skepticism turned into stunned silence. Max launched himself into action, leaping over hurdles and weaving through poles with effortless precision. Luna followed closely behind, darting through narrow tunnels and balancing perfectly on a teeter-totter plank. Their movements were fluid, almost artistic, leaving no room for error. When the tracking exercise began, Luna took center stage. Sarah handed one of the bikers a piece of cloth and instructed him to hide it somewhere in the clearing. The man smirked, stuffing the cloth into a hollow log and covering it with leaves. He returned to the group, confident that the dog wouldn't find it. But within seconds, Luna sniffed the air, locked onto the scent, and trotted straight to the log, retrieving the cloth triumphantly. The real showstopper came during the apprehension drill. Sarah asked 4 bikers to scatter into the woods, pretending to evade capture. They laughed as they ran, convinced they could outsmart the dogs. What happened next left them speechless. Max and Luna moved like shadows, disappearing into the trees and reappearing moments later with each biker cornered. Max pinned one man gently but firmly to the ground, his teeth inches from the biker's arm, while Luna stood growling low at another who tried to climb a tree to escape. By the time all 4 bikers were rounded up, the entire gang stared in disbelief. Even Razor looked uneasy, his earlier bravado fading fast. Sarah walked over to retrieve her dogs, praising them warmly before turning to the group. "This isn't about intimidation," she said evenly. "It's about showing you what happens when you underestimate someone, or something. You don't understand." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter replaced by quiet murmurs. For the first time, they realized Sarah wasn't someone to mess with, and neither were her dogs. Back at the military base, Sarah spent her days building an unbreakable bond with her 2 loyal companions, Max and Luna. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were highly trained, intelligent, and disciplined animals who had saved lives alongside Sarah in some of the toughest situations imaginable. Max, a muscular Belgian Malinois, was built for strength and speed, capable of taking down even the strongest opponent if needed. Luna, a sleek German shepherd, had a nose so sharp she could detect scents from miles away, making her invaluable for tracking missions. Together, the 3 formed a team that worked like clockwork, each member knowing exactly what the others needed without saying a word. Every morning began with training exercises designed to keep Max and Luna sharp. They practiced obedience drills, ran obstacle courses, and honed their skills in simulated scenarios. Sarah would toss a ball into the tall grass, and within seconds, Luna would dart after it, her eyes locked on the target. Meanwhile, Max demonstrated his agility by leaping over hurdles and weaving through poles as if it were second nature. Watching them move with such precision and focus always reminded Sarah why she loved working with these incredible animals. They weren't just tools or weapons. They were partners, friends, and family. Despite her dedication to her work, Sarah couldn't escape the whispers circulating around town. Word had spread about the new female handler and opinions were divided. Some residents admired her quiet determination and professionalism, while others dismissed her as someone who didn't belong. The Iron Vipers, especially, seemed determined to make her feel unwelcome. Their motorcycles roared through the streets late at night, shaking windows and rattling nerves. Whenever Sarah drove past them, she noticed the way they glared at her truck, their expressions filled with mockery and disdain. One evening, during a routine patrol near the edge of the forest, Sarah encountered the bikers again. She and her dogs were checking the perimeter fence when the sound of revving engines echoed through the trees. Moments later, a group of bikers sped down a dirt road that cut dangerously close to restricted military property. Sarah stepped forward, raising her hand to signal them to stop. "This area is off limits," she called out firmly, her voice cutting through the noise of their engines. The bikers slowed down but didn't look impressed. One of them smirked, leaning casually on his handlebars. "What are you going to do about it, little lady?" he taunted, his tone dripping with arrogance. Another chimed in, laughing loudly. "Yeah, call your puppy squad to bite us." Sarah didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she pointed to a nearby sign clearly marked restricted area, no trespassing. Then, speaking calmly but with authority, she reminded them that trespassing on military land carried serious consequences. Max and Luna stood beside her, alert and watchful, their presence alone enough to make the bikers uneasy. Though they tried to act tough, Sarah could see the flicker of hesitation in their eyes. Still, they revved their engines one last time before speeding off, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. As Sarah watched them disappear into the distance, she felt a mix of frustration and determination. These men weren't just reckless. They were testing her, trying to see how far they could push before she cracked. But Sarah wasn't going to let them win. She had faced tougher challenges in her career, and she knew Max and Luna were more than capable of handling whatever came their way. That night, as she prepared dinner in her small quarters on the base, Sarah thought about the encounter. She realized the bikers weren't just a nuisance. They represented something bigger, the constant struggle to prove herself in a world that often underestimated her because of her gender. But instead of letting it discourage her, Sarah used it as fuel. Every insult, every challenge only strengthened her resolve to show everyone exactly what she and her dogs were made of. Little did she know, the real test was still ahead. And when the time came, Max and Luna would be ready to step up in ways no one, not even the Iron Vipers, could have anticipated. Months had passed since Sarah's showdown with the Iron Vipers, and life in the small town had settled into a peaceful rhythm. The once feared bikers kept to themselves, avoiding any areas near the military base or the woods where they'd been humbled by Max and Luna. Their loud engines were heard less frequently, and when they did appear in town, they seemed quieter, almost subdued. It was as if the entire community had taken a collective breath of relief. For Sarah, the changes weren't just external, they were deeply personal too. She had come to this town uncertain of how she would fit in, unsure if her skills and dedication would be enough to earn respect. But now she felt a sense of belonging that she hadn't expected. People greeted her warmly when she walked down the street, often stopping to chat about her dogs or ask for advice. Parents encouraged their children to look up to her as an example of strength and perseverance. Even the local diner owner started saving her favorite booth, always making sure there was a fresh pot of coffee waiting when she stopped by. One crisp autumn morning, Sarah decided to take Max and Luna on a long hike through the forest. It wasn't part of her official patrol duties. It was simply a chance for all three of them to enjoy some quiet time together. The leaves crunched underfoot as they wandered along familiar trails, sunlight filtering through the golden canopy above. Every so often, Max would dart ahead, his nose twitching as he explored scents hidden in the underbrush, while Luna stayed close to Sarah, her keen eyes scanning the surroundings protectively. As they reached a clearing overlooking the valley below, Sarah paused, taking in the breathtaking view. This forest had been both a challenge and a sanctuary for her. It was here that she had faced doubt, fear, and even danger. But it was also where she had discovered her own resilience. Looking at Max and Luna, who sat patiently beside her, tails wagging gently in the cool breeze, she felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude. These two dogs weren't just her partners. They were her family, her confidence, and her greatest allies. On the drive back to the base, Sarah noticed something unusual. A group of bikers sitting quietly in the corner of the same diner she'd visited months ago. At first, she tensed, wondering if trouble was brewing again. But then she saw Razor among them, his leather jacket replaced by a plain denim one. He caught her eye briefly and gave her a respectful nod before returning to his conversation. It wasn't friendship, it was acknowledgement. And that was more than she'd ever hoped for from him. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared dinner in her quarters, she thought about everything she'd accomplished. She hadn't set out to change anyone's opinion of her or prove anything to the world. Her goal had always been simple: to serve, to protect, and to make a difference. Yet in doing so, she had inspired others, broken stereotypes, and created a legacy far beyond what she could have imagined. Max and Luna lay sprawled across the floor, exhausted from their hike but content. Sarah smiled as she watched them, marveling at how much they had taught her about trust, loyalty, and courage. They reminded her daily that true strength didn't come from aggression or dominance. It came from teamwork, patience, and heart. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the mocking stares of the iron vipers to the admiration of the townspeople, every step had shaped her into the person she was today. She knew challenges would still arise. Life rarely offered smooth sailing, but she faced the future with confidence, knowing she had everything she needed right beside her. The next morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Sarah stepped outside with Max and Luna at her side. Together, they began another day of protecting their community, ready for whatever lay ahead. Whatever happened, Sarah knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a handler, a soldier, or a protector. She was a symbol of resilience and proof that even in the face of doubt and adversity, one person and two incredible dogs could make all the difference. As the demonstration came to an end, the bikers stood frozen in place, their earlier confidence shattered. The once cocky grins had faded, replaced by expressions of shock and unease. Max and Luna stood calmly by Sarah's side, their job done, but their presence still commanded respect. Even Razor, who had spent years cultivating a reputation as fearless and untouchable, looked visibly shaken. His arms were no longer crossed. Instead, they hung awkwardly at his sides, as if he didn't know what to do with them. Sarah took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. "I didn't bring you here to embarrass you," she said, addressing the group. "But I did want to make one thing clear. Messing with me, or my dogs, isn't just a bad idea. It's dangerous." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You can keep trespassing and causing trouble, or you can leave this area alone. The choice is yours." Razor opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For a man used to being in control, this was unfamiliar territory. He glanced at his gang members, hoping for some support, but they avoided his gaze. One biker shuffled uncomfortably, kicking at the dirt with his boot. Another muttered something under his breath about needing to get back to town. It was clear that none of them wanted any part of another encounter with Max and Luna. Finally, Razor spoke, though his usual swagger was gone. "All right, fine," he said, his tone clipped and defensive. "We'll stay out of your way." He hesitated, then added reluctantly, "And thanks for not letting your dogs hurt anyone." Sarah nodded, accepting his apology without gloating. "Good decision," she replied simply. Then, turning to Max and Luna, she gave them a gentle pat on their heads. "Let's go home." As Sarah walked back toward her truck, the bikers began dispersing, climbing onto their motorcycles and revving their engines. But there was no bravado this time, no loud taunts or roaring laughter. They drove off quietly, leaving behind only the faint smell of gasoline and tire marks on the dirt road. Back at the base, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. She hadn't set out to humiliate the Iron Vipers or prove herself through force. Her goal had always been to protect her team and the surrounding area from unnecessary conflict. Still, she couldn't deny feeling a sense of satisfaction. Not because she'd won, but because she'd shown them the power of discipline, teamwork, and trust, not just between her and her dogs, but within herself. Max and Luna seemed to share her mood. As they settled into the shade near her quarters, chewing on their favorite toys, Sarah noticed how relaxed they were. These dogs thrived on challenges, and today's events had given them exactly what they needed: purpose. Watching them now, content and happy, reminded Sarah why she loved working with animals so much. They weren't just tools or weapons. They were partners, capable of achieving incredible things when treated with care and respect. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah sat outside with a cup of tea, replaying the day's events in her mind. She thought about how far she'd come since arriving in the small town, how quickly people had dismissed her because of her gender and profession. Yet here she was, standing tall despite the odds. More importantly, she had earned the respect of those who mattered most: her colleagues, her community, and even the Iron Vipers, albeit begrudgingly. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end. While the bikers might have backed off for now, she understood that proving herself wasn't a one-time event. Respect had to be maintained through consistency, integrity, and action. And as long as she had Max and Luna by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The forest around her grew quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a lone motorcycle rumbled faintly, fading into the night. Sarah smiled to herself, knowing that today's lesson wouldn't soon be forgotten. Not by the bikers, and certainly not by her. News of the encounter between Sarah, Max, Luna, and the Iron Vipers spread like wildfire through the small town. People who had once dismissed her as just another outsider began to see her in a new light. The story traveled quickly. From the local diner, where waitresses whispered about it over coffee refills, to the gas station, where truck drivers swapped exaggerated versions of how that lady with the dogs took down an entire biker gang. By the end of the week, Sarah's name was on everyone's lips, and not always in mockery or doubt. At first, Sarah didn't pay much attention to the buzz. She stayed focused on her work, continuing her patrols and training sessions with Max and Luna. But it became impossible to ignore when people started approaching her directly. A farmer at the market thanked her for standing up to the bikers, saying he'd been too afraid to report their illegal activities himself. A young boy shyly asked if he could pet Max, his eyes wide with admiration as Sarah explained how the dog helped keep the community safe. Even some of the tougher locals, men who might have scoffed at her before, tipped their hats respectfully when they passed her on the street. The Iron Vipers, meanwhile, kept their distance. Razor and his gang avoided the woods near the military base altogether, sticking to quieter roads and less conspicuous behavior. Occasionally, Sarah would spot one of them in town, but they never made eye contact. If anything, they seemed almost polite. Once, while filling up her truck at the gas station, Sarah noticed Razor sitting on his motorcycle across the lot. When she glanced his way, he gave her a curt nod before driving off without a word. It wasn't friendship by any means, but it was respect, and that was enough. What surprised Sarah most, though, was how her story inspired others. Young women in particular began reaching out to her, curious about what it took to become a canine handler. Some were teenagers dreaming of careers in law enforcement or the military. Others were older women looking for a change. Sarah welcomed their questions, sharing stories about her journey and emphasizing the importance of hard work, patience, and trust, not just with the dogs, but with oneself. One afternoon, after giving a talk at a local high school career day, Sarah found herself surrounded by students eager to learn more. One girl, no older than 16, approached her hesitantly. "Do you think someone like me could do what you do?" she asked, clutching a notebook tightly to her chest. Sarah smiled warmly. "Absolutely," she replied. "It's not about being the strongest or the toughest. It's about believing in yourself and working hard. And having partners like Max and Luna doesn't hurt either." She gestured to the two dogs lying patiently at her feet, tails thumping softly against the floor. The girl beamed, clearly inspired, and Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing she was making a difference beyond her immediate duties. Even within the military unit, Sarah noticed a shift. Her fellow handlers, many of whom had initially underestimated her abilities, now sought her advice and praised her skills openly. During joint exercises, they marveled at how seamlessly Max and Luna followed her commands, often asking for tips on improving their own bonds with their canine partners. Sarah gladly shared her knowledge, reminding everyone that success came from mutual trust and communication. As weeks turned into months, life in the small town settled into a rhythm of quiet normalcy. The Iron Vipers stayed away, and the forest remained peaceful. Sarah continued her patrols, always vigilant but no longer burdened by constant tension. She had proven herself, not just to the bikers, but to the entire community, and earned their respect in return. Driving back to the base one evening, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the challenges she'd faced, the lessons she'd learned, and the unexpected friendships she'd formed along the way. Beside her, Max rested his head on the center console, while Luna curled up in the passenger seat, her breathing slow and steady. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude. For her dogs, for her resilience, and for the opportunity to make a lasting impact in a place she now called home.